Welcome to the Artist on Artist lecture series. My name is Jasmine Raymond, Dia's curator, and I'd like to begin by thanking Art and for Art's Sake and the C Foundation for their generous support of this program. Thank you. I also would like to thank Christine Poor and Patrick Hellman for their essential help in organizing this series. Above all, the program owes its identity and history, as you probably know, to Lynn Cook, Dia's curator at large. Tonight's talk will be the last in a series until the new year. Lise Deschênes' talk on Robert Irwin, which was originally scheduled for next week, has been postponed for the spring. So look for our calendar so you can see the new dates. I'm delighted to welcome Charline von Heyl, who will be talking tonight on Bruce Nauman's work as the starting point for her talk this evening. I can see from the audience here tonight that many of you are very familiar with her work and her biography, so I won't bore you with details like that. But as you know, she was born in Germany and has lived in New York since the mid-90s. She studied painting with Jörg Immendorf in Hamburg and Fritz Schönwegler in Düsseldorf. She first began exhibiting her work while living in Cologne in 1999. We became very aware of her work in that celebrated group exhibition, the Cologne Show, and among most of her recent solo exhibitions, we could name a few, like the Consortium's show in Dijon in France, and Kapitän Petzel Gallery in Berlin, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the Vienna Secession. Last year, she was an artist in residency at Chinati Foundation in Marfa and had a recent exhibition at the Ice Plant there as well. Please join me in welcoming Charline.
Where do I put this? Patrick, what does power off in 5 minutes say? I'm always so paranoid about things going wrong with the... It's like, all right. Nice turnout. Great. A lot. Thanks for coming. The one problem with that thing, as you will be aware of, is that it's actually a lecture that I have to read from the text that I have written. So I actually hate my reading voice. You get a very different performance from what I usually do, like shooting from the hip, reacting to what I see, doing some talk that actually comes out of the moment and changes every 5 minutes. This is actually something that I'm going to be glued to, and I apologize for that in advance. Strangely enough, my accent gets really strong when I read too, which I can't quite explain. But okay, let's just go for it. I just opened this, right? And magically an image is going to appear. Yes, sir. Okay, I'm actually not going to talk about the whole work of Bruce Nauman, which would be absolutely impossible because it covers so much ground. I'm only going to talk about Mapping the Studio, which is a piece that I saw first 2001. But let me just, Mapping the Studio is as an installation at Beacon right now and since a while, and I hope you all are familiar with it, but I'm going to get into a lot of things that came to me as associations from there. So I'm going to read now. So Lynn caught me a little bit by surprise when she asked me to do a lecture for Dia. But nevertheless, immediately I thought that I wanted to talk about Nauman's Mapping the Studio, Fat Chance John Cale. At that time, I had actually only seen it once, in its first installation in Cologne, 2001. One of the main things that had affected me so profoundly was the amount of time I had spent with it. I usually race through museums, only to park myself in front of a few paintings that I can use, that inspire me to do something or to think about something. I'm rarely interested anymore if an artwork does not produce a certain amount of notes to self. That's actually not quite true. My experience of mapping the studio was very different and unusual, and it profoundly affected me. It immediately became one of my absolute favorite artworks ever. But I did never analyze what it actually was that made it so important to me. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to investigate. And even though I knew and agreed that Nauman is one of the best artists around and fundamentally important, there was always a little nagging feeling of unease towards the fact that absolutely everybody seemed to think he's just the coolest artist ever. So I thought maybe I could get to the bottom of that uneasy feeling as well. But let me first talk about why I think that mapping the studio is such an incredible work of art. Lights off. After I agreed to do the talk, I went down to Dia Beacon, where it is on display now, to spend time with the piece again. Let me briefly explain the setup of the installation for the people who are not familiar with the piece. Nauman did film his studio at night, in the dark, with an infrared camera. He filmed during 42 nights, each night for 6 hours, in a 4-month period, and he cut the thing together to the length of one night, to almost 6 hours. He did use the studio during the day, so things sometimes shift around and appear or disappear mysteriously during the projection time. Almost the only action comes from the animals caught on film: the mice, the cat, moth, bugs, and, only as sounds from outside, even coyotes and horses. The spectator sits on one of many chairs in a room surrounded by the projections. Here are images of all 7 angles. If you see the 2 little dots over where actually the arrow is, which shouldn't be there, that are the eyes of the cat who's looking inside. The eyes of the animals are always reflected in this weird way, so they look like little mutant animals. It's kind of creepy. That's the cat looking out. And this is actually a movie, so it is actually playing now while I'm talking. The first experience that I had in Cologne was actually quite different from the way I experienced it at Beacon. The chairs in Cologne were on wheels, so every sound would and could make me turn and move. I was chasing the action with my body, being aware of myself in its sensory motor form, scurrying through the room, not unlike the animals, watching and reacting. At first, I therefore disliked being forced into a more or less static position at Dia Beacon. The heavy stools did not only have no wheels, but also a back, so I couldn't even turn around on the chair. I could only move by choosing another chair and therefore a different perspective, which meant taking all your stuff off, going somewhere else, putting yourself on the other chair. In the projections, but then I realized that this physical passivity enabled me to let go of reaction and to become absorbed in the projections, acquainted with the image. My eyes started to move in and with the projected forms, caressing the spatial discontinuities, shifting interpretations, suddenly making sense or losing sense of what I thought I saw. There were 7 different stages with constantly morphing stage sets. Things happened, scurrying, crawling, buzzing, tumbling, jumping, strolling, but they happened rarely. I start to be ridiculously grateful for every mouse that lingers, and the appearance of the cat completely overwhelms me. Something is always happening behind my back. I know it. Nothing is suddenly everything. The night is laughing at me behind my back. When there is no action, the grain of the film seems to move, swim, and slowly rotate. You see how this weird, how the whole image seems to move. The pixels are rearranging themselves in constant rotating clouds. It looks like breathing. Reality is dissolving in front of my eyes, mesmerizing me with a silent, post-apocalyptic vibe. Suddenly, a horrifyingly loud, clumsy noise, the artist stumbling through the dark to reset the camera, kicking things out of the way, happening behind me, of course. The doors to the outside in the studio are open. Their darkness is still lurking, a reminder of the power of the night. The animals disappear into it and reappear from it. I'm wondering about the shadows the infrared light throws, this idea of a shadow existing in the dark. For the camera, but not existing for the human eye. A nice little side of a paradox. That's the problem with reading. It should be like, I'm wondering about the shadows the infrared light throws, this idea of a shadow existing in the dark for the camera, but not existing for the human eye. A nice little side of a paradox. I remember that this was one of Edmond Jabet's questions in his book of questions. Do you ask your shadow what becomes of it during the night? Or ask the night about the shadow? The studio at night becomes a Claude glass, a black mirror transporting me into a different realm of perception. Nauman himself described it. What I felt in watching is almost a meditation. Because the image is fairly large, if you try and concentrate or pay attention to a particular spot in the image, you will miss something. So you really have to not concentrate and allow your peripheral vision to work. You tend to get more if you just scan without seeking. You have to become passive. I just really love this scanning without seeking idea. It reminds me of de Koning's sliding glimpser, if anybody of you knows that image. That image actually hangs over my bed in our house, and it's one of the images that that has probably started my love for Nauman, because I was like, yes, right. Always, again and again. It's just such a great motto. I mean, you don't need to know more than that. That's basically it. Up to this project, Mapping the Studio, Nauman always measured and mapped the world in relation to the body. Some of them he called theaters of experience. The pieces were intense, often violating big time the spectator's comfort zone, with extremes of sound and visual attacks of blinking neons, or confusing and frustrating setups, with cameras and projections teasing and punishing. The metaphors were blatantly crude, but always in the end inverting into their opposite, as in clown torture. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? Repeat. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? Repeat. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Who was left? Repeat. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who's left? Repeat. I tried to get the thing downloaded from YouTube, but it didn't work, so I have to do it myself instead. Or the hanged man. You're impotent when you're alive, but in death you get this giant erection. That, by the way, just to as an aside, I just saw that for the first time at Beacon, and it kind of really disturbed me. As a German, you see things, it made me wonder about how you see things from different viewpoints. As a German, I knew that all the people in the resistance that were hanged had official order of their belt to be removed because Hitler liked the idea of this erection happening and actually watched some of them. So I was wondering if this had actually anything to do with the piece or not. I was not going into it, but it's just something that at that moment I thought, well, that's actually not so funny. And it's interesting how to think about how different people just see things with different backgrounds. Okay. Nauman is a master of paradox, a master of ambiguity, the one-handed clapper, a Zen master with hysteric visual means. Wait. Those are actually 3 movies that are coming, so you can relax into. I'm not going to change the image for a while and talk about mapping the studio. Mapping the studio goes beyond that, though. It leaves any didactic approach behind. Paradoxicality and ambivalence are there, but hidden. They sneak up on us from behind. Seeing in the dark is a fantasy of omnipotence, like being able to fly or understanding animal language. Here we are those privileged spectators, armed with that secret weapon of being able to see in the night. The infrared camera is decoding the dark for us. Immediately we are fascinated. The night is going to reveal its secret. We are fascinated into a different world, not image, not action, not space. A world without us, with no relation to us. A world, the night, that we fear with primal intensity, even though that fear makes no sense. Me anyway. Now, with our X-ray eyes, we are going to dismantle night's mystery. But then something strange happens. I want to watch. I want to control. But I can only see. One cannot watch nothing happening. And what happens too fast, no way to catch it. I get thrown into a paradoxical state between tension and frustration. I am trying to pay attention, but it just is not possible. I'm a voyeur of nothing. So I let go and relax into a strange awareness foreign to me, at least in a museum. I watch night happen in its silent exteriority. I am letting go of wanting to know. I am letting go of fascination. Knowledge at rest. Unknowledge, to quote Blanchot, which I know is cheesy to do, is not a lack of knowledge. It is not even knowledge of the lack, but rather that which is hidden by knowledge and ignorance alike, the neutral, the unmanifest. And that is what is happening to me. I get shifted into neutral. Here's Bruce Nauman on how he originally came to the idea of mapping the studio. Wait, is that right? Yeah. In fact, wait. How could that happen? Sorry. You just always think it's perfect and then something happens that's... Oh yeah, okay, I'm fine. Here's Bruce Nauman on how he originally came to the idea of mapping the studio. I will come back to this particular quote later for other reasons, but first I want to get into how he intends to map the studio. So I was sitting around, being frustrated, because I didn't have any new ideas. And I decided that you just have to work with what you've got. What I had was this cat and the mice, and I had a video camera in the studio that happened to have infrared capability. So I set it up and turned it on at night when I wasn't there, just to see what I would get. At the time, I remember thinking about Daniel Spurry's piece for a book. I believe it's called An Anecdotal Photography of Chance. You know, he would photograph or glue everything down after a meal, so what you had were the remains. It made me think that I have all this stuff laying around the studio, leftovers from different projects and unfinished projects and notes. And then I thought to myself, why not make a map of the studio and its leftovers? Then I thought it might be interesting to let the animals, the cat and the mice, make the map of the studio. And I think this is the sentence that I want to talk about right now. I think delegating the task of the mapping to the animals is actually a very important part of the piece. It advances Nauman's investigations into the unity of space and sculpture, and his use of time and of sound in regard to sculpture, into a new realm. Heidegger refers to animals Weltarmut, love that word, or poverty of world, and points out that the behavior of animal is never an apprehending of something as something. I like this idea in relation to sculpture. By letting the animals map the studio, he loses all connotations of content, or even objectness. He loses the things as things. In the animals' world, the studio is, as such, is absent. The things as such are absent. And this creates a different presence of absence for us. In Rilke's Aidsdeni's elegy, it is the animal, die Kreatur, that sees the open with all its eyes, in distinct contrast to man, whose eyes have instead been turned backwards and placed like traps around him. In fact, here's how Rilke somewhere else describes the way we as humans perceive space. Space exceeds us and translates things. So that the tree's being may succeed for you, cast around it the inner space, that space which announces itself in you. Surround it with restraint. It knows not how to limit itself. I should actually get to another. Okay. Only in taking from your renunciation does it truly become a tree. I think that quote has something to do with Nauman's take on sculpture and how he plays with negative and positive space. It has something to do with the way his sculpture goes beyond the etching, to do with the way he insists on sculpture going beyond the object and being dependent on our perception. That can be a chair, a room, or a body. Our daily lazy understanding of our surroundings gets stretched and bended and questioned. By adopting the animal gaze, he frees sculpture from his own Wittgensteinian heroic quest and compulsive mapping and plunges into the unknown. Let me quote George Agamben to elaborate on this. Too often, we imagine that the relations a certain animal subject has to the things in its environment take place in the same space and in the same time as those which bind us to the objects of our human world. This illusion rests on the belief in a single world in which all living beings are situated. Uexküll shows that such a unitary world does not exist, just as a space and a time that are equal for all human beings does not exist. The fly, the dragonfly, and the bee that we observe flying next to us on a sunny day do not move in the same world as the one do not move in the same world as the one in which we observe them, nor do they share with us or with each other the same time and the same space. This is where Nauman's space as sculpture enters a meta level. The layers of different maps become infinite. Every moss, spider, bug, cat, or mouse, with their unique interpretation of the same space, adds a different perspective. But I'll go on with Agamben, and I swear to God, there are not going to be many more quotes after that. But I think it's important. I think it's actually, I really love the text. It really puts a different space into the head. I like the way the following quote refers also to music and paradoxical coincidence, which seems to be such a Naumanian term. Those music and those are also expressed in the subtitle of the work, Fat Chance, already expressed in the subtitle of the work, Fat Chance John Cale. Every animal's environment is a closed unity in itself, which results from the selective sampling of a series of marks in the environment. These are not, however, objectively and factually isolated, but rather constitute a close functional. Or as Uexküll prefers to say, a musical unity with the animal's receptive organs that are assigned to perceive the mark and to react to it. Everything happens as if the external carrier of significance and its receiver in the animal's body constituted two elements in a single musical score, almost like two notes of the keyboard on which nature performs the supramental and extra-spatial symphony of signification. Let us consider the spider's web from this perspective. The spider knows nothing about the fly, nor can it measure its client as a tailor does before sewing his suit. And yet it determines the length of the stitches in its web according to the dimensions of the fly body. And it adjusts the resistance of the threads in exact proportion to the force of impact of the fly body in flight. The most surprising fact is that the threads of the web are exactly proportioned to the visual capacity of the eye of the fly, who cannot see them and therefore flies to death unawares. The two perceptual worlds of the fly and the spider are absolutely uncommunicating, and yet so perfectly in tune that we say that the original score of the fly acts on that of the spider in such a way that the web the spider weaves can be described as fly-like, though the spider can in no way see the surrounding of the fly. The web expresses the paradoxical coincidence of this reciprocal blindness. Uexküll affirms that no animal can enter into relation with the object as such, but only with its signifiers of significance. that kind of made me think of the movie Matrix or a Piranesian labyrinth. It's the vision of that thought, I think, in combination with the way that the projections form a room, just added so much more layers to the whole idea. That labyrinthic universe filled with scuttling creatures that, if ever, only meet once in an event that constitutes the catastrophic end of those worlds. And coming to think about it, our human universe is not that different, except that we don't usually eat each other. There is no such thing as a shared life. And if in one of these rare, incandescent moments that actually do happen, we do connect, we get totally thrown off kilter, catapulted into a different orbit. And after the inescapable, more or less immediate disconnection, we mourn that moment for a long time. This might go a bit far, but we know Nauman's world is soaked in this deep melancholia of this existential and violent solitude. I think this idea of the mutually dependent but almost totally disconnected animal universes can be seen as such an existential metaphor, even if that was not intended. It just seems to be in accord with the spirit of Nauman's work. Mapping the studio is also about another thing that fascinates Nauman. The idea of real time, which he explored almost from the very beginning of his work. Fishing for Asian carp, for example, lasted just until the fish was caught. The catching of the fish worked with time in the confines of the closed room, mostly his studio, combining awareness of time, space, and sound in video performance indebted to the works, among others, of Merce Cunningham, John Cale, and strangely enough, as he points out somewhere, Gestalt therapy. The one that I like best of those is Failing to Levitate. I think it's just such an unbelievably good image. And it really covers a certain feeling in the studio. But there's also walking in an exaggerated manner around the perimeter of a square, bouncing two balls between the floor and the ceiling with changing rhythms, hopping in a corner in the studio. Those were ontological and empirical investigations of basic concepts of space and time, translated into movement and metaphor. Don't even start. But they did also address, I think, the painful restlessness of the artist in the studio, the restlessness of the artist's relationship with the world, the claustrophobia that the artist feels while waiting for the stupid phantom called inspiration. Sorry, it's so pixelated, but I got it from the web and it was impossible to find otherwise. It's Bacon's studio. Most of our work, same as his, gets done during that waiting time. A surprising amount of good work is actually born of procrastination, not of inspiration. But for the rare moments when inspiration actually strikes, we do pay, during the other times, with this constant feeling of restless unease, something like a weird spiritual heartache. The space of the artist's studio is not just a workplace. In fact, if there's work, the studio, as an idea, ceases to exist. Artists invent themselves in their studio. It is not only a temple of anxiety, but also a regressive safe haven, where we can shut ourselves off from the world, shut off the phone, follow our weird timelines, and snack all day and drink too much, We can read there, watch movies, follow surreal association chains on the web, and so on. By the way, I actually, when I was thinking about the whole artist studios thing, something that I don't want to follow up here, but as an idea, I think it's interesting how artists' websites now are used in the self-mythologizing of the artist. And I have been looking through a lot of them while working for this, and it's actually really kind of funny. Like, for example, Philip Taff, he really juxtaposes pictures of his work with pictures of his studio in a way that you really get a feeling for, or that you get the feeling that you're supposed to feel. So to let a friend or a collector enter the studio is a huge token of trust, but it can also be used or manipulated. The realities of the studio are elusive, but they're also determining. The artist's studio is a fiction, necessary in the creation of the artist as the artist. But Nauman refuses this fiction and creates the studio and the artist directly as artwork. By doing this, he paradoxically recreates the fiction in his favor. His studio is impersonal, just a room littered with remains of projects or an empty space, pure potentiality. Sorry. In his studio, there are no phony arrangements of brushes, books, colors, no postcards on the wall. There is no daybed. There must be a daybed somewhere. I mean, that is just unbelievable for me that there would be no daybed. There would be just too puritanical. Even monks have some sort of bed. So nothing of that elaborate stage we create to believe and make believe our own rap. In fact, in this piece, he creates the ultimate, mapping the studio, he creates the ultimate anti-studio. Without work, without artist, without light, without any traces of biography or individuality, and apparently without a couch. But mapping the studio did not only deflate the artist's studio, the so-called artist studio. It deflated the artist's studio at night, which is artist myth-making par excellence. There is this commonplace idea of the artist working away at night. Philip Gaston, in his work Windowless Studio, the only sound, the buzzing of the neon light, the work taking on the painful urgency and intensity of an insomniac's fury and self-pity. How often have I heard this? I stayed the whole night at the studio, I worked all night. The whole literature of the artist is full of references to that image of the artist solitarily working away in the cage of the night. I don't believe a word of it. I have said it myself, and I've always grossly exaggerated. Late evening maybe, but never the whole night. In fact, I don't even believe that Philip Gaston worked after 2. After all, he had a devoted wife who was providing him with regular meals, and that alone tends to shape the rhythm of night and day. By the way, another one of those artist myths that I don't really want to cover here, but just for the record, if you ever hear it, when an artist tells you, I haven't worked since weeks, that never is true either. What is it with that image of the artist being in sync with the night that takes such hold on the common imagination? As if the night legitimizes the work, and working at night legitimizes the artist. The artist uses the night to establish and insist on his exclusion. Working at night is the ultimate, unquestionable signifier of artists' integrity and intensity. Nauman, being the mystic of reality that he is, sets us straight by simply showing us the studio at night. Seeing is believing, as Paul Teck said. So when I started to think about the lecture, I knew I needed to read a lot to place the piece in context, mainly for myself. And I ordered almost everything that came up on Amazon that I didn't already have. And to my delight, a little booklet, just stapled together, arrived. Here, I have it here. It's a flip book, and I don't know if you can see it, but you flip it, and in Germany we call it thumb movie of the cat going around the corner. It has the image of the projection on one side, and on the other side the careful logbook of Nauman following them, like it says moth at 5:30, moth at 5:37, moth at 5:37. So, I mean, his manic compulsive it is the manic compulsive logbook again, but it's completely different. So, it's a flip book in bright pink, which showed the cat entering the room upside down. It really made me laugh. He did it again. I had totally missed the show at Spiro in Westwater, called Mapping the Studio 2, with color shift, flip, flop, and flip-flop, Fat Chance John Cale, and never even heard about it. Let me describe this show. He used the same images and the same length of time as in Mapping the Studio 1. And there's also an action version of this one, but we can talk about the action version maybe at the end of this thing. That's a whole other thing. But now it is colored, and the color shifts. The shift sequence is green to red, red to blue, blue to green, and the cycle continues. Oops, sorry, other way. And the cycle continues. Because the color is changing slowly between two colors through time, the effect of the color shading is like through a spectrum. The time span for a complete cycle, green to red to blue to black and back to green, is 30 minutes. The flip, flop, and flip-flop changes are done on the video imagery using the original orientation of the video image as the reference for each change. The changes are not done in a cumulative fashion. In other words, when the video image is flipped, it is flipped relative to the original video image. When the image is flopped, it's flopped relative to the original video image, not from the previously flipped image, and so on. Oops, yeah. The complete cycle from flip to flip-flop and back to flip is 1 hour with 15 minutes between changes. I just loved this little book, and I tried to imagine what this variation of the piece must have looked like and felt like. And then, suddenly, I felt a strange feeling of disappointment. Maybe I had admired the pattern being broken, had admired the light-handed but deep sincerity of Mapping the Studio 1. The straightforward philosophical and aesthetic celebration of presence, precisely because it was established through the absence of his usual puns and obvious paradoxes. The moment of pure presence in art has always been catnip for me. Even though I have been made very aware of this, being more than problematic in contemporary discourse. But that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. It's this point where painting shuts you up and ties you down. And now here it was again. This time he didn't put himself in a clown costume, not the spectator. This time it was night itself becoming the clown. Night itself in gory colors, which is the ultimate violation. The point about the night being that with the disappearance of light, all colors disappear as well. So here we have night made up in all shades of the spectrum. Night as clown, basically repeating repeat and repeat, repeat and repeat, set on a repeat and repeat, flipping and flopping and flip-flopping and flipping and flopping and flip-flopping over and over again. It is a completely contrary version of Mapping the Studio 1. Something that, again, he had made, something that the action version had already half-heartedly attempted. Again, he had managed to have the cake and eat it. And then I became annoyed at my disappointment. After all, this is such a damn cool move. But exactly because this is such a cool move, I became disappointed in my annoyance at my disappointment. That confusion needed to be investigated. Had I just become weary of this constant inflation-deflation thing? Of his celebration of the two-faced truth? And of his insistence on the either and the or? No wonder he's a patron saint of every wannabe cool man-child, be they male or female, in the art world. Somebody said rightly that there's nothing that can be said against Bruce Nauman that hasn't been said in his favor. His being cool is a single common denominator that everybody I know agrees on. But what does cool mean? Cool as an idea itself is paradoxical, as we know, with the terms of cool changing with every half generation. Cool is in constant flux. What was uncool yesterday is cool tomorrow. It also needs to be said that the American concept of cool differs a lot historically from the European idea of cool. American cool is originally rooted in a celebration of individuality, the idea of the free self, like the lonely hero out west, the pioneer, the rebel. European cool is not that much based on individuality, but more on idiosyncrasy, on the dandy, the poet, the underdog. It is more a question of the right taste than of the right attitude. Bruce Nauman definitely impersonates American cool. It is no wonder that he is so important here. He has given American art an identity and a role model after Pollock. But I think he was early on also able to integrate the spirit of European cool, irony, and a paradoxical idea of successful failure. After all, he started showing with Konrad Fischer in Düsseldorf already 1968, along with Polke, for example. And this is the piece that he did for Konrad Fischer, which is, actually I don't have the title, but the title is something like 6 Ways to Annoy Konrad Fischer. And I just imagine the poor guy sitting there in his gallery with really disgusting noises going on all the time. I mean, that is such a good sculpture. Nevertheless, though, there seems to be something like real coolness, independent from fashion, and it is a form of grace. And Bruce Nauman seems to be blessed with it. It is hard to explain why and what that ultimately might mean. After all, the work itself, especially the tautological pieces like Eating My Words or Feet of Clay or Waxing Hot, are actually kind of stupid. And a lot of people at the time doing the same thing just embarrassed themselves with that kind of work. It was something I grew up as an artist making fun of. Remember Tim Ulrichs? But it is not only the early work. Other artists have later as well used video and sculpture similarly, producing similar intensities, tackling on similar themes. There are a lot of clown sculptures out there, videos, photos. Some of them cool enough, but most don't have the chance of a snowball in hell to ever be cool. And I don't think it is necessarily because he was doing something first, either. Because often enough he didn't, which he was always the first to happily acknowledge. So what is it that makes him so cool? Well, he started out as a cool guy. Here's an excerpt of an interview from '67, The Way Out West, interviews with 4 San Francisco artists. Reliance is on intuition, accident, even the obvious, which just happens to be at hand. Trying to live in the moment, these artists are involved with the flow of making, as much as the conclusion. The subject matter is closely attached to everyday life. It is often randomly autobiographical, with objects left unformed, retaining multiple layers of meaning. It is inclusive as possible. There is a willingness to be unpretentious, unsolemn, jokey. They seem to aim at being deliberately not impressive. By taking such an isolated stance, there is an element of deliberate perversity, since, of course, all are obsessively well informed about New York. In fact, much about what they do is about not going along with New York, about not being overwhelmed by it. The work itself seems to suggest a crotchety, standoffish individualism. That has opened up something else. To them, even time is different. Every part of life has eternal value, to themselves and potentially to their work. A lifestyle that is classic Western in its nonchalance, in part of this unurban, relaxed, with big drinking, slow talk, cowboy boots, blue jeans, whiskers. I like the word whiskers. I had always presumed this Marlboro Man of the art world image of Nauman's that I had slightly resented, not least because of its exclusively male connotations, had come in late, after he had retired from the art world. But apparently, attitude had always been a big part of his work. Let me get back to my first quoting him when I explained how he started out with mapping the studio. So I was sitting around being frustrated because I didn't have any new ideas, and I decided that you just have to work with what you've got. What I had was this cat and the mice, and I did have a video camera in the studio that happened to have infrared capability. So I set it up and turned it on at night when I wasn't there, just to see what I'd get. He often talks about beginnings like that. I was working very little, teaching a class 1 night a week, and I didn't know what to do with all the time. There was nothing to do in the studio because I didn't have much money for materials, so I was forced to examine myself and what I was doing here. I was drinking a lot of coffee. That's what I was doing. That's the nicer one. Here's a quotation from Robert Morris around the same time. First day of continuous project in the warehouse. Dumped out 2,000 pounds of wet clay off of 50-pound cans onto the floor. No idea what to do with it. Began aimlessly throwing it around. This disarming frankness is obviously more attitude than the whole truth. I think it is a stance of heroic impotence, which is at the heart of cool. Something gets later picked up in the work, something that gets later picked up in the work, over and over again. Nothing is something. I am not an artist, but I am an artist. My failure is my success. Pesos and Bezos, violence and violins. The true artist helps the world by revealing mystic truth. Asked about that piece, he is disarming and elusive again. The most difficult thing about the whole piece for me was a statement. It was a kind of test, like when you say something out loud to see if you believe it. Once written down, I could see that the statement, "the true artist helps the world by revealing missing truths," was on the one hand a totally silly idea, and yet I believed it. It is true, and it is not true at the same time. It depends on how you interpret it and how seriously you take yourself as an artist. His self-positioning is always ambivalent, which increases his mythological status. Susan Sontag talked about the artist's silence as a form of power. According to her, silence creates opacity and thus a nearly unassailable position of strength. Nauman ultimately creates the silence by always having it both ways. But in the process, he gets to say all the things that he wants to say. Every melodramatic, existential platitude possible. He doesn't turn it into kitsch, though, because he either makes the experience direct and physical, or by immediately stating the opposite, like an antidote. In the word pieces, the opposite is often the word's secret life, its shadow, its mirrored image that he finds. He makes language expose its darkest subliminal commands. But Mapping the Studio seemed different. It was uncool in its insistence on presence. It was demythologizing, a composite of fragile, self-contained universes. Something outside the usual tortured headspace. And yes, he did create the compulsive logbook that controlled and documented every move later. But that was actually funny in its clumsy obsessiveness, and in the way it absurdly presented him as master of the universe after the fact. It didn't take away the power of the piece, and it did not create a counterpiece. If anything, it showed him to be exactly the outsider of the night that he was, an artist that Kafka could have invented. Almost a little ridiculous. If anything, it also rather enhanced the metaphysical modesty that the piece created. So I resented the way he did re-establish his invulnerability with the flip-flop version, even though formally I thought it must be irresistible. Coolness is always projected, never real when felt. It is not a quality, but an idea. And the people that seem to be real cool are the ones that invite and encourage this projection, consciously or not. Bruce Nauman is a master at directing and manipulating this powerful fantasy. His art and his image have become inseparable. Were it not for his painful sincerity and honesty that again and again has pushed him to investigate the extremes of the human condition and the limitations of artistic practice, a sincerity I suspect he needs to protect, this self-mythologizing would be absolutely unbearable. But as he said in the consummate mask of rock, people die of exposure. His projected image of cool detachment did enable him to sneak the message through, to speak of solitude, of fear, of pain, of sins, virtues, of ridicule, and of isolation, of impotence, and of failure, of time and space and art, all of them with their respective big capital. So I thought about Mapping the Studio again, and I realized that what ultimately makes Bruce Nauman so cool is the quality of his work and the fact that he does reach almost everybody and allows every single person to have their own experience with the work. And my experience, this excitement about the prolonged moment of presence and passive being in the world, that experience was a response to my own lack presence is my own big fantasy. The flip-flop version does absolutely not contradict the first version of Mapping the Studio, nor does it make it whole. It just offers another delightfully light-hearted play version. It talks about the joy of making art when it comes easy and you have nothing to lose, the way only an old master can do it. He did it because he can, and I can't wait to see it. I'm blushing. All right. I guess now it's time for question, but I'm... Can we have the light on now, maybe? Okay, how long was it? Pretty good. It's not easy to fill an hour. It's 45 minutes, but yeah, it was pretty dense, I guess. Question?
If you don't know, it's okay. I love that word.
Me too.
I know, I can tell. It's great. It's great. What do you make of the fat chance John Cage part?
The title? That actually is... he was supposed to be in a group show at Anthony Doffey's in London, something like, 5-6 years ago. And actually, it must have obviously been before Mapping the Studio, which is already 10 years old. One always forgets that he's been doing that stuff so long. He did send a telegram to the gallery. The thing was supposed to be, I think, about artist's relationship to John Cale. I don't even know. It was not? No? What? No, say it. Cage. Oh, ich habe die ganze Zeit John... Oh my God, I said the whole time John Cale and it's John Cage. Yeah, that's so typical. Okay. So, okay, whenever I said Fat Chance John Cale, it was supposed to be Fat Chance John Cage, which I know. All right, okay, forget that. He did send a telegram to the gallery with those words, Fat Chance John Cage. I love John Cage. Okay, that's so embarrassing. And Anthony Doffey thought he was just he made just fun of him, and it was not integrated into the exhibition. It was part of the of his biography later, and I think he probably did put it into the title as well to point out that it was such a good piece because everybody talks about that now. But I looked through it. He does not explain actually why that is supposed to be part of that piece, except for that there is actually a very important part of the whole surrounding is sound. And the way that the way that the sound is coincidental, that something suddenly happens and a sudden sound does something, and that is very much the way John Cage did actually construct his works. So there is a parallel. I think it's supposed to make clear how much the sound is as important as the images, and. Which actually at Deer it's a little problematic because it's an open space and you get the sound from all the videos, so you don't hear the different sounds of the moths, which actually do make sound anymore. In Cologne you did hear all the sounds and it was really part of the whole thing. But that's why it's called Fat Chance John Cage. God. You should have said that earlier on. But okay, never mind. Okay. Okay, all right, good. All right, thanks.